third topic. Ooh, and yeah, we had that discussion with Steve, because you found, right, the same albums for question two and question three. It might be, yeah,
Originally, I did, but then like
yeah.
when you kind of explained what you were doing, um, I didn't show any of these, but I have mentioned a couple of them.
Okay,
But do you want me to go first?
go ahead.
Okay, I will do these in chronologic order and my experience with them, how I encountered them. So it's 1965. I am 9 years old. I go to the movie theater to see the movie Help.
Ooh,
Oh,
Okay, so after seeing the movie, I had to have the album. So I'm quite sure this is the first album ever bought, not with my own money, I don't think. I'm sure my mother got tired of me badgering her and she bought it for me. So, and this to this day, it is my favorite Beatle album. Abbey Road is number two.
yeah.
This is number one. I know Abbey Road is the greater piece of art, but I'm just talking about what I prefer to listen to, what I enjoy the most. It is always this album. I think it always has been. So that 1965 when I'm 9 years old. So then up next, let's move up to 1970. At this point, I'm 14 and I'm really getting into music. And I'm at a party and somebody puts this album on.
ooh, yeah.
And I'm like blown away. And like the band that I started playing in 1971, we did play a lot of Black Sabbath. So yeah, I mean, this everybody knows it. It starts out with the rain and the thunder, and it's just like, what is this? I've never heard anything like this. Especially up to this point, really, because this comes out early in '70. This is February of '73, so really, I'm just 13 and a half at this point, and it. All I've heard up to this point is all a lot of that um, pop tunes that I heard on AM radio. Never heard anything that heavy. I've heard some Led Zeppelin and Hendrix, Cream, but this was they changed the ball game.
Yeah, they
It was
did.
just a completely new sound, and to this day, they are my favorite band. I know they're the most important band to me because, like I say, when I was playing in a band, we played a lot of Black Sabbath, especially from those first five albums.
Mm.
I still listen to that album a lot today. And because of my spreadsheet, I can tell you how many times I've listened to that album. I looked it up before we started. Okay, Help, I've listened. Now, this is since February of 2005. Um, Help, I've listened to 105 times. The Black Sabbath debut, 111 times. So that's in 19 years' time. So they're getting a fair amount of spins during the course of every year. I don't know if you ever heard the story, David, why I started doing this.
No, I can't remember.
Okay. It was February 18th, I think, 19th of 2005. My wife and I had been on vacation in London. We're flying back. I get on the plane and I got 8.5 hour flight here. So I grab my iPod and I'm just spinning it around thinking, what do I want to listen to? What do I want to listen to? So I just said, you know what? I'm going to listen to the Black Sabbath debut. And just as I'm sitting there, I think to myself, man, I wish I knew how many times I've heard this album in my life because it has to be hundreds of times. And I decided right then and there, I'll just start documenting it. And so I have kept a spreadsheet since February 19th of 2005. Every day I enter what I listen to. And so, in fact, my most listened to album just happened. The first one to ever hit 150 plays. It's Dark Side of the Moon. It
Yeah.
just happened like within the last couple of weeks.
Must have been the eclipse.
Pardon me?
Must have been the eclipse that inspired you.
It was because I did a live stream during the eclipse, and
Yeah.
that was one of the albums I picked to show. And then I think I mentioned this earlier. The first prog rock album I ever bought. I
Yeah,
heard Roundabout on the radio.
I know that one. Fragile.
I
Yeah.
bought
Yeah.
Fragile, and this was, like I say, as much as Black Sabbath was different for being heavy, this was just a completely different song structure and style for me. It wasn't verse, chorus, verse, bridge, chorus, there were all different kinds of different time signatures. They're singing about subject matter I've never heard before. And, it's got the great artwork of Roger Dean. So, yeah, and that I have listened to 81 times. So, and I think, no, Close to the Edge is my most listened to Yes album. That's my favorite Yes album. But yeah, those are the three big albums that I can point to at specific times, why they affected me. The Beatles, obviously, Black Sabbath, because it gave me my favorite all-time band. And then, yes, it introduced me to progressive rock. So
it's very interesting what MGK said. I think you should have imagine you would have sit on the plane with someone who works at the Silicon Valley. This guy would have developed an app, for the VC, just we know how many times do we.
Yeah. I'm a spreadsheet, freak.
Spreadsheet monkey, we used to call him.
Pardon me?
Spreadsheet monkey, we used to call him.
Yeah. So I have spreadsheet for all the concerts I've been to. I have.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's very handy, but too bad MGK's Boston isn't on here, because he actually met his wife Patty because of Excel spreadsheets. He was taking a class with her, and it was, I believe, about learning Excel, and they were in it together, and that's how they met.
This is what we call the excellence. Anyway, okay. Question for you, David, and you're next.
Yeah, MJK Boston. Any concert? Have I seen any concerts in Canada or the US? The answer is yes and no. I've been to the US and Canada many times. I spend holidays, business, countless times really. But the only time I've never seen a name band in the USA or Canada. But I did spend a couple of weeks in Manhattan on a trip with a couple of friends, and we saw multiple gigs, but these were like basement gigs of up and coming bands, none of which made it as far as I can tell. So yeah, I'm afraid I've not seen any name bands in the United States. But coming back to the big milestone albums for me, these were like pivotal albums. I think in my musical journey. Sadly, the most recent one is 1978. Let me just shoot them past you. The first one was A Trick of the Tail by Genesis. And I hate to be a Genesis bore, but, it was my first band I saw. And, I saw them in April 24th, 1975, doing The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And within the space of about 6 weeks, Peter Gabriel had left the band. And I was just getting into Genesis and going back through their, acquiring their back catalogue. And I was devastated. And I thought, oh my God, this is just going to be so, this is the one band I really feel a great affinity for. And they're finished. And there was lots of stuff in the music press about them kind of carrying on, maybe doing instrumental only type stuff in the absence of a singer. And of course, we all know the history of Phil Collins going to the microphone. But I remember that this album, they announced this album was going to come out, and they did about, I think, 3 promo videos that they had in a record shop in Newcastle where I was working. It was called JJ Windows. It's still there, although it's a bit expensive for vinyl these days. But every lunchtime I would go up there and watch these promos that were on a loop. Ripples, Trick of the Tail, and Robbery, Assault and Battery. And I thought this is going to be really good. And when on the day it was released, I bought this copy. Actually, it's not this copy because the first one is a matte. I've got multiple copies of this one. This is a later version. I thought I was absolutely blown away. It's fantastic. And then I was really lucky to see them on the 1976 tour where they toured this album, and they only did a handful of gigs. I think a couple in Canada, maybe in the US, and 2 or 3 in the UK. And it was just mind blowing. Real pivotal moment in my musical experience. Absolutely fantastic concert. And there's a film called Genesis in Concert that was filmed at the Glasgow Apollo where I went to see that. So that when that film came out, it was on a double bill with Rick Wakeman's White Rock in the cinemas, and we went, me and my good buddy Brian, sadly no longer with us. He and I went to watch the films and kind of revisited our experience at Glasgow. It was absolutely amazing. The next big breakthrough for me was a completely different genre, and that was this album by the French composer Camille Saint-Saëns. And this is his third symphony. It's called the Organ Symphony. And you guys are familiar with Close to the Edge, the title track of the album. And there's that great break about 2/3 of the way through the track where Rick Wakeman's playing a church organ. And it just sounds amazing, doesn't it? It's absolutely fantastic. This blows it away completely. I mean, I don't know if you guys have got a passing interest in classical music, but this is the album I recommend to rock fans because it is hyper dynamic. It's got amazing climaxes, and the organ chords just blow your socks off. It's absolutely fantastic. And this was important to me because up until this point, this was 1976, classical music was wallpaper music to me. It was kind of all background music. And even though I'd acquired some budget label stuff, it never really grabbed me until this full price album came out. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is why people really, really love classical music. So if you're interested in progressive rock and you're open-minded to try some classical, just like prog, takes multiple listenings before you get into it, but it's absolutely fabulous. So that got me into a lifelong journey in classical music as well. And then the next album that was a great milestone was not this particular copy, but this was Darkness on the Edge of Town by Springsteen. A friend at work lent me this album, and it just completely blew me away because the lyrical content, he admits himself that he's a bit of a fraud. He's the working class hero, and it's kind of a bit of a persona. So I'm kind of open to the idea that people think he's a bit of a fraud, but he was writing about stuff and about people who were in my community, people who were, didn't have a lot of money, people losing jobs, factories closing, or people working, from dawn till dusk, broken relationships and dead ends and all that sort of stuff. And I thought the lyrical content, as well as the music, really grabbed me. And then I became a big fan of Springsteen. And I went cold on him a few years ago, but I saw him last year, and actually I'm seeing him in 3 weeks' time in Cardiff in Wales. Might be my last Springsteen gig, but he still puts on a show. But this is the album that head and shoulders, absolutely amazing album.
The Trick of the Tail, that was my gateway for Genesis to be listenable. I remember reading a review. It was either like in Circus Magazine or Cream Magazine when it was either Foxtrot or Nursery Crime came out. Just a rave review about it. So I bought it blind, put it on. It wasn't for me at all. It just wasn't what I listened at that point. I mean, I'm playing in a band and I'm playing nothing but, Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, Led Zeppelin, Grand Funk, that kind of music. So it wasn't for me. And it wasn't really until, probably sometime in the 90s that I got Trick of the Tail and Wind and Wuthering. And now I own an entire discography, but it was because of those two albums that did it for me.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm next, I guess. It was really hard to cherry pick three albums, but we were talking about the journey when I was younger, when I was discovering music. So I was thinking about what was the emotion, the special connection I had with those albums, and I choose three ones. The first, uh, yeah, my father, I think he refurbished the hi-fi system we had. He still had this old turntable, and he has a cassette deck. And but back in the days, I was still my Walkman when I was going in junior high, and I heard that very same copy when I was 14 years old, and I discovered Pink Floyd. I discovered that album, and it was a really shock because I wasn't prepared for such composition atmosphere. Back in the days, I was listening to a lot of Beatles, Led Zeppelin, or more disco sounds. ABBA. My mother was very into ABBA, and the first time, I remember my father put that one on the turntable. It was really a shock. He was calling that progressive music, and I was enjoying that Shine on the Crazy Diamond, because it took me like 17 minutes when I was biking to my school. So still a great memories. I brought my father gave me that copy, so now I have this with me forever. I don't need another. I don't need an audiophile. I don't need a UK press. Um, he bought that one when he was 20 years old. He has, back in the days, the military. When you go military service, or I don't know how do you say it correctly. 1 year you're on duty, and this is I think one of the only few albums he had bought in 75. So very special meaning to me, this album by Pink Floyd.
Fantastic album.
Yeah. And then connection with Canada. Once again, I will talk about my father once again. He took a trip in 79. They weren't that popular in France back in the days, but he saw them live in Hamilton, which is a close city close to Toronto. And he was blown away. So he brought a couple of their records, and I discovered when I was kid, and when I was dreaming about Canada. I took the first trip here in 2013, and this is the music I just wanted to listen to when my plane is landing in Toronto, in YYZ or YYZ. The intro of how does the song A Passage to Bangkok, which is a brilliant intro. And all that story, 2112. We discussed that album during our prog stream. We have a prog stream with Steve, hosted on Steve's channel, and Alex Beer and Vinyl. And we all agree this is a masterpiece. And I have this very special connection with that one, Rush 2112.
That's a crime against fashion, though, that album. When you hold up the back cover.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah. The outfits they're in. Yes.
Yeah.
That is.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And the last one is an album I discovered in 2017. I made a burnout at work, and I took a couple of days off. I went to Italy with my wife, and when we were driving to Italy, we were constantly listening to this one.
Yeah.
Forever Changes Love. I discovered literally that time this one. They were not famous, or the thing is, I'm still on catching up. All these bands, they were not as big as the Doors, as Grateful Dead, as the Pink Floyd. So I'm working on finding discoveries, digging out some hidden treasure from the past. It's not that hidden treasure, of course, but I had a CD back then, and really interesting what they have made. It sounds almost to me as a perfect album. There is nothing wrong. It's almost like a debut album from Crosby, Stills and Nash or Abbey Road. There is nothing wrong. There is no bad song. There is nothing, I would say, dull on that one. Spanish influence, psychedelia. it's a pity they never were touring in Europe. I think they wanted to stay not too far from their dealer, maybe. I don't know, in the West Coast. He had a very Arthur Lee. He made another album, Vindicator. He had to go to jail for some stupid things. He passed away 20 years ago, and it's still one of my favorite album. I discovered very later, but I remember I was playing that record. We were working in a small office in Switzerland, and I remember my colleague. She was like dancing on the Spanish guitar, and she said, "Hey, what is that?" So yeah, very 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 interesting. So
Yeah, great album.
yeah, forever changes.
You know, I obviously, I said earlier that I kind of started listening to music seriously in the early 70s. And I kind of was really sniffy about the 60s for a very, very long time because the BBC Radio 1, which was the pop station in the UK, kept banging on about the Beatles all the way through the 1970s. So we had prog, we had hard rock, we had the blues rock stuff, we had punk, new wave, and yet the mainstream radio station kept banging on about the Beatles. And of course, you know, later on I acquired all the Beatles stuff as well, and the Stones stuff, and all the classics, including Forever Changes. But for years, I don't think it was just me. There was a bit of my generation kind of thought, well, the 60s is for old guys. And now I'm an old guy, so I'm open to it now.
Yeah, I have another problem. I was born in a small city in France. I'm 30 years old. I thought maybe will I really start a channel talking about band from the 60s with my stupid French accent? People will take me seriously because you know you guys you lived through those years. You're native speakers. So what can I bring to that? You know, this was part of my reflection I had back in the days, but I feel legitimate to talk about because I have an emotion. I listen to that one. It's not only about, hey, I have a great picture disc. Show me my picture disc. I know the music on that. I read a lot of books. Beatles, Neil Young is a great. Still have to Steve. You said Greg Lakes and Geddy Lee. I really lack of time, but it's on my list. And it's nice that we have this community of people. We are people from all around the world. We can chat about music. We can meet sometimes, and yeah, it's really
You
good.
know, it's funny, David, that the difference in our age is just 3 years, but a lot of times 3 years is a big gap for music.
Yeah.
I mean, it completely have people have completely different tastes and likes. And you grew up thinking the 60s music was for old guys. I grew up thinking the music from the 50s was for the old guys. You know, I completely dismissed Elvis and Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis, Chuck Berry, all of them, because I'm like, those are oldie acts. That's what they were playing on the oldie channel, you know. And now I have a box set of Little Richard. I watched his documentary. I read his autobiography. You know, I've got a great Jerry Lee Lewis live album from the Star Club in Hamburg. You ever come across that live album? Fantastic album. And I certainly could have seen Jerry Lee Lewis live growing up, but you know, Elvis I would have missed, you know, because he didn't tour much anyway.
Yeah, that version on the What I Say is considered one of the best, I think. Jerry Lewis, right? The concert, yeah. Or roll over Beethoven. I think one of the songs is considered absolutely.
Yeah, and he's just playing on that album. He's just playing with a house band. He just traveled by himself, and wherever he went, he said, "Just give me a band."
Yeah. This is also what I find interesting. As I said, when I was 14 years old in the year 2000, when you were young, you had to listen to new music. It was old, it was bad. When I said I was listening to 80s music in '99, I was outcast. 20 years later, it's different. People are listening to music. Sam St. John, for instance, very into Bob Dylan. It's a perfect example.
Right.
You have a lot of great young people. They rediscovered Hendrix, Kraftwerk, or Pinup. Pinuppy is in the chat in the Peanut Gallery. He's a young guy. He's in his 20s. He's discovering all these bands, and I think this is amazing. Now we can discuss about that. We don't have this stupid mindset we used to have when I was at high school. I was suffer of that. So this is interesting.
I think the other thing is that the genre we haven't talked about that must have been amazing back in the day was when the blues greats were out there touring, where you got your Howlin' Wolf and Lightning Hopkins and Muddy Waters and so on. Because you listen to their stuff now, because I picked most of that stuff up on CD when I was buying loads of CDs back in the 80s and late 80s and throughout the 90s. It's raw as hell, but it's just so full of energy and commitment from the singers. You know, it's just amazing stuff. And there's, even though you had the Stevie Ray Vaughan stuff and all that sort of stuff that came along later, and there are, you know, you go to, you know, Chicago clubs, Buddy Guy's Club or something like that, there's blues artists are performing kind of all the time, but it's just so out of the mainstream now. I just think it would have been amazing to see those artists back in the day.
I did get to see Muddy Waters. He opened up for Clapton one time when I saw him.
Wow.